Welcome to another episode of Conservation Conversations, Season 6, Episode 15. Tonight promises to be no less exciting than all of our other previous Conservation Conversations episode. And to each 241 of you who have tuned in, we are very, very excited that you are here and thankful that you are supporting us in these endeavors to share the word on conservation to as many people across the world, not just South Africa, as possible. Now, if you have missed any of our conservation conversations episodes, or if you simply want to let us know what you think about it, it's simple. You just head over to any one of our social media links, Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube, or even just send us an email and let us know what you think. Any suggestions, any recommendations, or whether or not you're just simply enjoying it. We value every form of feedback. And of course, if you have missed these, you can simply head over to our YouTube account. Generally, within a matter of hours of the following workday, the latest episode of Conservation Conversations will be uploaded for your enjoyment. So if you happen to miss it or couldn't tune in, then you at least have an opportunity to do so the following day. And of course, we do all of these episodes of Conservation Conversations completely free of charge. If you have it within you that you would like to donate towards the cause, please scan the QR code on your screen now, or you can head over to birdlife.org.za/BLSA conversations, and there is a donate link. Now, without further ado, on to this evening's presentation and an exciting one it is. We will be talking about the halting of the destruction of the West Coast here in South Africa through both legal action and public participation. Now, I'm hoping that there's a number of people who are tuning in here from the Western Cape, but even if you aren't tuning in from the Western Cape, this is your opportunity to find out what exactly is busy going on. And I must be honest, I stay in Gauteng, and obviously I try my best to keep abreast of as much updates and happenings in terms of what's going on as best I can across the whole country. But the magnitude of what's going on the West Coast at the moment never really hit home until I started to look into it a little bit more. So I hope that this webinar tonight proves just as exciting to and insightful to each and every single one of you. Joining us, we are going to have three individuals representing the Protect the West Coast organization. We've got Patrick Forbes, a legal advisor to protect the West Coast. We've got Mike Schlebach, the managing director of Protect the West Coast, and the environmental scientist Tiaan Engelbrecht, who are all joining us this evening. Mike, thank you very much to each and every single one of you joining us. Going to hand over to you.
Thanks, John. Thanks for the introduction, and it's a real great pleasure to be here with everybody this evening. I come from a family of birders, although I never took it up properly myself. And at one stage, I could tell probably about 10 or 15 types of birds in the country, but I think that's it's probably gone down to like 5 now. But yeah, so thanks for the opportunity. Protect the West Coast was founded in the second half or last half of 2020. Tiaan, can you go to the next one, please? So the mission statement you see here has, this is something that's evolved, and it's a sort of something of a modern take. Our initial mission when we started Protect the West Coast was really just to bring what was happening from a mining perspective into the public domain. Because as you probably are well aware, the West Coast is out of sight, out of mind. It's a very it's an area that not many people have been to, so nowadays, we're in it to protect the West Coast. Protect the West Coast safeguards the rich biodiversity and cultural heritage and ecological integrity of this beautiful, unique region, one of the world's last unspoilt wild spaces. Thanks, Tiaan. Um, yeah, so the West Coast is literally under siege. We've at Protect the West Coast, we've really focused on beach mining, but the sad reality is that mining is taking place all over the coast, from the inland regions to the coastal area. And then you've got mining for diamonds in the near shore and even further out to sea. And now you've got oil and gas as well. So yeah, it's really a sad case of uh, being completely under siege, and there's a deluge of mining applications that are still coming. So when we started this project, it seemed to be at a time where mining applications weren't that prolific, although um, although I think it was just a case of us not knowing really what was going on up there. And now that we've sort of delved into this thing and this project has moved along in this way, it's we've got it to a point where there's literally dozens of new applications come through every year. And although we've done a great job in getting what's happening up there into the public domain, the mining applications still keep coming, and we've got a lot of work to do to fend these off. And then I'll just add as well that these mining operators on the coast are, by and large, they operate illegally. So we have very good laws that govern mining in South Africa, and if and Protect the West Coast is by no means against mining per se. We all use a lot of the things that mining provides, except diamonds. We don't really need diamonds anymore. But yeah, the reality is that sure, forgot my train of thought there now. But yeah, so here we have uh, the map of the West Coast, all the way from Saldanha all the way up to Alexander Bay. Um, and while the Western Cape West Coast is still relatively in good shape from a mining perspective, if you go further north up into the Northern Cape, from Honeycliffe Bay all the way up to Alexander Bay, and then along the banks of the Orange River, all the way to the Ruchtesveld National Park, um, that area looks like the moon. It's been so severely damaged and by the diamond mining industry that's been operating in that area for the last 100 odd years, and they've done zero to little rehabilitation. And there's even mining in the Ruchtesveld National Park. There's mining on the banks in the agricultural areas on the banks of the Orange River. And it's that, and one of our main concerns was that the Western Cape, because there's new applications in by a lot of the same mining operators that have operated on the West Coast, in the Northern Cape for so long, that they're coming further and further south, and that they'll turn the Western Cape West Coast into the same sort of desolate and moonscape environment that they've done up north. So this image represents the Torman mine. This is MSR, the Australian mining company that is now in liquidation. This was really where Protect the West Coast started. It was around 2019 when I was tagged in a Facebook post by a friend of mine that spoke about how MSR had just been granted a 10 beach extension to this very mine here by the Department of Environment. And, this is also a great surfing area. It's a great fishing area, obviously a great birding area. And yeah, from there, um, through the middle of 2020, I found myself with a bit of time and decided to take a drive up into this area, and I went and saw for myself what was going on, and that sort of sparked this idea of against mining or illegal mining, and sort of came back to Cape Town and called up the few friends that had started to talk about this, and we decided to get the Protect the West Coast project together. Thanks, Jan. I think this was around, so we officially registered the Protect the West Coast NPC in November 2020. And I think this was around sometime in 2021, where we decided to have a march or protest up on Beach 10 of the 10 beach extension, just north of the Olifants River. And it was a very, very difficult protest to organize. It's like 400 or 450 odd kilometers up in the middle of nowhere. And getting people up there was pretty difficult, but we landed up with about 5 people, all of which you see in this photograph right here. And but our thing was just we actually had more photographers and media people there than we had protesters. But our mission was to hand over a list of grievances to the miners there, to Tormen or to MSR, and we landed up handing the list of grievances to some unsuspecting security guard. But yeah, so and this was also the time that we bumped into the good people at Run West. Dom, I'll get into that in a little bit actually. But so this is an image in late 2021, I think it was. We through the end of the pandemic, which was a very difficult time to launch anything. We launched the film we made called Ours Not Mine. It's available on YouTube, and this was a great milestone for us. At this point, we were really working hard on just trying to bring the public into the space and let them know about what was happening up there. And we figured that making a film would be one of the most prolific ways of doing that. So that's we launched that then. Nick. This is a bunch of runners running down the beach from the Olifants River estuary. During the first protest that we held on Beach 10, we met up with Dom DeJesus and his band of merry runners that had started running from about 100 k's north of the Olifants River, and they ran all the way down over a period of I think 3 or 4 months. They ran all the way down to Cape Point. But the day that we had our protest, they were there. And they tried to create like a deviation for the security guards on the mine so that we could get in close and cause a ruckus. But anyway, that was and now Dom's run has become an entity called Run West, and I think it's going into its 3rd year, where they have a very large running event, a 21k run and a 10k run from Olifants River estuary down to Durban. I think the first run they had 150 2 years ago. Last year, I think they had 350, and this year I think they've closed entries at 500 or 550. So the idea is really just to bring people up into this area and for them to spend money, and to try and get people to understand the true beauty and value of the West Coast and to love it as much as we do, and so that they can support it. Cool. Next slide, thanks. So over the next from late 2021 through to sometime in 2022, our main mandate, as I said, was just to get into as much media as we could. We made the film. We were in several nationwide publications, global publications, and around the world. And in that couple of years, we really did a great job in bringing the sort of global or even Western Cape community into the space, and which culminated in a lot of media coverage. Thanks, Jen. Then in 2023, we launched a Protect the West Coast, sort of segued somewhat from primarily a media platform to that of a legal platform as well, where we launched an urgent interdict against Transhex, the diamond mining company, where in late 2022, Transhex just rocked up unannounced on the beaches of Doringbai. You can see Doringbai in the background there, and just started mining, and no one had a clue what was going on there. And after some investigation, we found out who they were, and that they were operating on a mining permit that had expired, but that had somehow miraculously been renewed, and which we felt was illegal. And so that's why in I think around middle of 2023, we launched this urgent interdict, and it landed up in court around in August 2023. And Patrick will speak to this a little bit more later on in this webinar. But this was quite a prolific turning point for our organization, and it culminated in an out of court settlement which protected a bunch of pristine coastline, and which included the Olifants River estuary. Next slide, thanks. And then in late 2024, after a few years of hard graft, Protect the West Coast launched what we call Ripple. And over the short time of our existence, we sort of realized some of the problems that were sort of playing out on the coast, and one of them was that the public just weren't engaging in these mining applications. And so we developed Ripple with a local digital agency called iBay. And Ripple is basically a public participation portal. So what happens is when there's a new mining application, we load the new mining application onto Ripple, and the public, whether it's the youth, it's specialists, or it's or just private people, they will get a notification. They can sign up as an interested and affected party, and they get a notification whenever a new application comes up, and then they can participate. So we've made it very easy for everybody to be able to do this. It's really just takes very nominal tech knowledge, and so we've made it as easy as we can. And the big thing with it is that we really want to get this into the communities up on the West Coast so that they can participate more in the space, as they've essentially been left out of the equation. So that brings us to these days. We've come a long way over the last 4.5 years, and we've just launched some new merchandise, which we use to raise funds for the organization, all high quality, locally made, upcycled products and organic cottons and things like that. That's it. So I think now I will hand over to Tian, who will talk a little bit more about Ripple. Thanks,
Hello, can
guys.
everyone hear me fine? Does that work nicely? Yeah, so thank you, Mike, for the introduction. And yeah, as Mike mentioned, the Ripple public participation platform is a really powerful tool. It's been well received from the public and other organizations, people seeing what we're doing, and it's shown some real success. So I'm really excited to tell you a little bit more about why it's needed and how does it work, and then how you can get involved. So, yeah, as Mike mentioned with this map, there's a lot of applications that are piling up on the West Coast at quite an alarming rate. And a lot of these mining and prospecting applications are bordering each other, or their borders overlap, which really puts a lot of threat on a wide range of species. And not only that, it covers a vast area, from inland terrestrial habitats all the way to the marine environment, putting pressure on a lot of different species. And Ripple is really good at highlighting these applications because, sometimes a notice board on a farming fence or a small ad in a local newspaper just is not enough to get these applications out to the public. So yeah, there's been a lot of oversight on the West Coast, and that's why Ripple is needed to bring these out into the light. And how does Ripple help? We've simplified the sign-up process, which we'll get to in a moment. But Ripple allows us to give our viewers a real-time updates on applications, when the deadlines are, where the public meetings are, and give them some more details. And we at Protect the West Coast spend a lot of time as a team to dissect the mining applications and really simplify the mining jargon to make it more accessible for the public, because a lot of those mining applications are super complex. And hopefully through this, we can strengthen the community engagement, get more comments, and essentially hold the mining sector accountable for their deeds. One challenge, however, is the lack of expert input. We've kind of been living by this rule of strength in numbers, but we acknowledge that specialist input, like a lot of the specialists and experts on this call, your knowledge carries a lot of weight when it comes to decision making. If you guys leave comments, so we really encourage you to engage with these mining applications and submit your comments. And if you don't feel like submitting comments under your own name, please feel free to send us your comments, and we'll submit it on your behalf, and you can use the Protect the West Coast name. But yeah, let's get to Ripple. What does it look like? How does it work? Yeah, it's a really simplified login and sign up process, just like any other application. However, we do have a login with OTP function, which is designed for our local community members up the West Coast who may not have an email address, so that makes it more accessible to them. But yeah, once you're into Ripple, this is what it looks like. It's quite a simple, easy interface. You can just view all the applications. If you're ready to comment, it's 5 clicks away from signing up as an interested and affected party. And then you just review your application, you can submit it. And then we also have this function where you can comment on mining application documents, whether it be an environmental management program or any of the specialist studies. This is also an option. And yeah, just some recent success of Ripple. In one of our recent applications, there were 59 total comments on the application, and 56 of them were from the public, but they were through the Ripple platform, which just highlights that if Ripple was not available at this point, then there would have been 3 comments from 3 organizational bodies like DFFE, for example. So yeah, this was a really good example of the use of Ripple in this vast West Coast landscape. But yeah, now over to our legal fish eagle, Pat. Over to you.
Thanks, Tian. Have you got me there? Cool. Welcome. Well, thanks for your time and attention. I've got the unenviable task of trying to make the legal stuff sound interesting, and it's at the end of the presentation. So if you fall asleep, I won't be offended. At least I can't see it. Just a quick punt on Ripple, and hanging on Tian's coattails there. It really is a revolutionary program or platform. We don't have something like this in South Africa. It opens the doors wide open to public participation, which has historically been, whilst the guidelines are workable, the actual engagement is just usually woefully inadequate unless it's happening in your backyard or on your street. But having access to something online, you sign up really quickly and your comment counts. We've seen the numbers of people commenting grow, and it's just been a huge success story, but it can just be so much better with more engagement. And I think if you're on this call, you're probably someone who wants to be engaged in these sorts of things anyway. Give it a try. If you're overwhelmed in any way, Tian can help you out there. I'll just pass that buck across. But it really would mean a lot to have more people on board and more people commenting. And it can be a comment from all walks of life. It doesn't matter whether you're a recreational user, whether you've never visited the coast in your life before. The impacts of the mining, essentially on a cumulative scale, are one not measured, and I think are just astounding and astonishing if one looks at that map. Anyway, okay, quickly onto the legal stuff. I'll try and keep it short and to the point. So, as Mike said, the genesis of Protect the West Coast was really around MSR actually, and the extension to the Torman mine, which, on a charitable interpretation, the extension was in fact an extension. On an uncharitable interpretation, the extension was actually a far greater size of area than the actual mining right had encompassed previously. So they ought to have gone through a proper process, but they sought to extend it under Section 102 of the MPRDA. So, but that was the genesis. MSR are now in liquidation, so it's yet another bad news story for the West Coast from a socioeconomic perspective as well as an environmental perspective. But what happened was the lens was on MSR, and then suddenly Transeks popped up, and that image that Mike showed earlier of them mining within a kilometer, I think, of Doringbai, unannounced. And we say unannounced not because they didn't have a mining right, but because there didn't seem to be any engagement before that particular portion of mining took place. But that galvanized us into action. And one of the difficulties we had was getting the information. What mining right? Where's the environmental management program? What are the conditions? Where's the oversight? Where's the Department of Mineral Resources? Anyway, that kind of got the ball rolling in respect of Transeks. And maybe you can just flip the slide there, Tian. But we'll talk a little bit about that court process, but around that, we can discuss the legislative framework, because I think it's important just to put us in context. Timelines around mining rights are important as well to consider, because there are long-term problems or issues that can be granted for up to 30 years, which is, I think, quite a long time. And then we'll talk about litigation as a tool, and then just the lessons that we've learned in the short time that we've been around, and the legal battles that we've had. Cool. So going back to this map, and I know you've seen it twice before, but I've sort of zoomed in on the area, and if you can see there, Ebenezer, Papendorp, and Doringbai. So that's the sort of area we're talking about, in between specifically Papendorp and Doringbai, for the Transeks application that was the subject of the court proceedings. But if you look at that map, it's the veritable smorgasbord of options here. Who do you want to fight with? There's so many operators up there, and some of them have been there a very, very long time. So it's basically wall-to-wall mining, certainly from Elands and all the way up to Orange, to the Orange River, which is, it seems crazy to me. But anyway, that's the state of play, and more applications are being made. To the extent that anyone is interested in what these applications pertain to, it's a broad range of things. It's from diamonds to heavy mineral sands, which is things like zircon, ilmenite, rutile, which is stuff in ceramics and in paints. But there's also other multi-commodity applications that are being made, phosphate mining. So there's a span of options available up there, and it is the proverbial gold rush, it would seem. But narrowing it down to Transeks, so Transeks have been around for a very long time. They've changed their name. It flipped across to Moonstone, but then flipped back to Transex. I'm sure people have probably come across Transex. Certainly, I would hope in the media coverage that we've given it, but perhaps prior to. They've been focused on diamonds mostly historically, and that continues to be the focus, although they've got 2 further applications currently under consideration, one of which is broadening their options, both inland on the beaches and offshore, although not deep offshore just as yet. So in relation to this particular application, we were looking at on the beach type mining in the nearshore environment, which often involves some of the graders and diggers that you had seen earlier on the beaches, and it can be quite destructive in terms of process. But this relates to 10 specific mining rights in that area. If you think you can flip the slide there, Tian. In the midst of all of this, we've seen a huge change in the legislative landscape, and it's not without its difficulties and challenges. We kind of sit in a hybrid scenario at the moment, where you've got the Department of Mineral Resources, now Petroleum as well, thrown in there, that is the sort of first gatekeeper for applications and authorizations to be granted, and then the appeal goes to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. So there's a sort of supposedly what we're calling the one environmental system, and I don't want to get burdened with that right now, but it's a hybrid of the DMPR now and the DFFE as sort of 2 bodies making decisions, and then one has recourse to the courts ultimately. But within that legislative landscape, you've got regulations under both the National Environmental Management Act as well as the MPRDA that are applicable. You've got estuarine management plans, for example, integrated coastal management programs under the Integrated Coastal Management Act. You've got the Protected Areas Act to throw in the mix as well. And then in this particular instance, the Western Cape Protected Area Expansion Strategy. So there is a myriad of legislation that's applicable. It makes it difficult, even for the lawyers, but even more difficult for those looking at it from the outside, wondering how on earth this all sort of fits together. And it doesn't fit together nicely. It is a rather cumbersome and difficult to navigate process. But in respect of Transex, they had historical old order rights converted into new rights. They had a 2002 EMPR, and to place that in context, that's the program or plan under which the mining operates. So they were mining in 2020 under a plan that's at that stage 18 years old, and they're still mining under that plan 5 years down the track from there. So in our respectful view, that's an outdated plan. They were directed by the DMPR to update that EMPR. There was a time at which there was a 2005 EMPR around that never got formally approved. The DMPR directed them to upgrade their EMPR, and at or about the same time they started mining outside Doring Bay, and that galvanized the interdect proceedings that we brought. So to summarize all of that and moving on to ultimately what the outcome was there was a lot of backwards and forwards, a multitude of affidavits filed. BirdLife South Africa were involved in that process. They provided us with wonderful expert input and some confirmatory affidavits in that matter, dealing specifically, obviously, with the bird-related impacts. And out of that, we finally reached an agreement with Transex that essentially secured certain areas as no-go, one of which being the olifants, which is a wonderful win. But there was also essentially an undertaking, and it was recorded in a court order, that the upgrade to their EMPR would be done in essence under what we would consider the new regs. So it was going to go through a proper public participation process. We would have input from all manner of experts, which we have done, and we engaged a team of really, really committed and great people on it. It went through a public participation process with community involvement. Meetings were held, input in that regard as well from the sort of grassroots level, which was awesome. And at the moment, it's actually still before the decision makers at the Department of Mineral Resources to formally approve the upgraded EMPR. As well as we got secured in that court order site visits, which has been a huge win for us. We've been able to engage our own set of experts to go on site and effectively provide a sort of mini audit of the mining operations, out of which we've had engagement with Transex on certain of the issues that we had highlighted that we had concerns with. So it's just, it really has, and obviously I'm speaking from a hopelessly biased perspective, but it really has, I think, moved the needle in terms of the level of oversight that we've been able to implement, and I think it's I hope sent a ripple out across the West Coast. So the other mining operators there are also aware that, you know, that they perhaps need to look over their shoulder a little bit more cautiously now, because there is a watchdog who is trying to make sure things are done according to the letter. Yeah, and then what was after this? Tian, do you want to slip? Oh, just quickly, I wanted to make reference to something here. So on what is your left-hand side, that was the no-go area we're secured in terms of the court order, which actually formed an annexure to the court order. But on the right-hand side, that's the no-go area, and I know the yellow line's not exactly clear, but effectively the solid green mapped area in the ocean, that's the no-go area that our experts have proposed be included in the latest draft EMPR. We'll wait to see what the actual approved one says. But just to give you an idea of the sort of distinction between the two. And those are the learnings and challenges we've sort of landed on post this process. And the community participation, speaking to what Tian was saying about Ripple, we really think participation has in the past been inadequate, and we're trying to get that really focused on and build up a whole lot more participation, because we think that's where the wins will come. Funding's obviously always an issue, and the Department of Petroleum Resources is not always the most user-friendly to work with, but we don't have to dwell on that for too much longer. But just from a birding perspective, we thought we'd throw in a little bit of info. That pentad that is the Olifants estuary has a total of 174 species that have been recorded in that pentad. And for anyone who has been up there, you'll know how beautiful it is. It really is a spectacular part of the world. Although it's not my backyard, I'm from KZN, but I can certainly recommend that people get up there. Yeah, all from my side. Sorry, I know we've run quite a long way over time here. John, back to you, I think.
Excellent. Yeah, Patrick, Mike, Tian, phenomenal. And thank you so much. Very, very insightful slides and insights into the remarkable work that you guys are involved in and certainly championing along our West Coast. I think, just based off of the many, many, many comments and questions that are now pouring in, what I'd hoped would happen has seemingly taken place. And I think many people's eyes have opened up this evening in terms of what is actually busy going on along our West Coast at the moment. So thank you, gentlemen. It's greatly appreciated. I'm going to delve into a couple of questions, and given that we have a formidable panel here this evening, I may just play devil's advocate a little bit, and ask the hard questions that perhaps some of us tuning in might be wondering. So yeah, let's get into it. If one of you want to answer it and take a jab, then please, by all means. But we'll start off with something from Irene Marindao. She's from Kenya, and she's asked a number of different questions. But I think one of the ones that have sort of stood out to me was that she says, we have mining ongoing at some of our heritage-rich forests along the Kenyan coast. Would you mind sharing some insight into your framework of pursuing litigation measures, as well as socio-economic issues that arise from mining and the impacts on biodiversity? How is it that you guys go about doing this? What is the process? How do people, for example, in Kenya or in any part of South Africa really, start to challenge these developments, and why is it important to do it?
Patrick, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can try. So in terms of the process, what in the South African space, it's any application for a mining right and essentially an environmental authorization has to go through a public participation process, and it's at that juncture that it is really critical, because if we have the level of participation that ought to be involved, and we have the experts giving their comments as well as the community. And when we spoke about the community, it's in the broadest sense. I mean, on the West Coast, we've got small-scale fishing communities as one example, but you've also got indigenous communities up there with a lot of cultural heritage, and then you've got the socio-economic community type dynamics in each of the towns. So it's a broad base, but if you get that broad base of people inputting into the application process, then the decision maker hopefully has all of the requisite issues before them, and then makes a decision one way or the other. And it's when those decisions are made that one can then challenge the decisions, either on appeal or through a court process on review. And ideally, if you have all of the requisite information before the decision maker and they get it wrong, that can be overturned on appeal or on review. It's very difficult, once the decision's made and the mining has started, to then stop the process or interfere. If there are contraventions with the conditions that have been granted in terms of the authorization and the mining company is transgressing those, one can address those. It should be done ideally through the Department of Mineral Resources, Petroleum Resources. They're the oversight in our view. So it often lies to civil society. But in cases like the West Coast, often out of sight, out of mind, and restricted access to mining areas. So it's very difficult to monitor that sort of thing. But from a process perspective, if you can get to the decision makers early when the applications are made, that's certainly the best way to challenge these. I hope that answers it.
Excellent.
Kind of.
Irene, I think, Patrick, that was an excellent answer, and thank you for that. Irene, yeah, probably best to have a look. There should be some other kind of guidance in terms of national legislation in Kenya that you could refer to. And I'm sure somewhere on one of the departmental sites that there might be reference to the public participation process and participating in that. So certainly have a look, see if you can try and find that. But hopefully Patrick's answer has given you a little bit of insight into how things are done here in South Africa. Now, gentlemen, the concept of mining is obviously amongst all of us here, and I think a massive portion, if not all of those attending this evening, we appreciate that it has detrimental effects on the environment, without a doubt. Now, in the converse, there are South Africans and people across the world who say that it is providing jobs and it is supporting communities. How do we navigate that? How do we change that mindset of this is important that we protect nature and wildlife, and that there are alternatives for us to consider? It's not just about a short-term process here in terms of getting what we can while we can from the environment. Mike?
Yeah, I'll take a stab, but Pat and Tian can chime in when they want. Um, from our perspective, there are very good laws that govern mining in South Africa. And if the mining operators, and I can only speak to what's happening on the West Coast because that's our experience, if they were mining in accordance with the law, and they're fulfilled on all their various different mandates, social upliftment plans, their environmental plans, their, rehabilitation plans, and they did things in the correct way, then we wouldn't have a problem. And when a mining application comes in, they promise all sorts of things like jobs, which 9 times out of 10, especially with nowadays with new technology, and with technical equipment that can't really be managed by sort of by local people, then they 9 times out of 10 they don't fulfill on that promise of providing meaningful work for the locals. And so, again, we're not against mining per se. We're just against illegal mining, and we're just against, they're not fulfilling on all their mandates. I don't know, Pat, do you want to add something there?
Yeah, certainly. I think that distinction that you've drawn there, John, is important because it's often pitched against one another as this is some sort of binary operation where it's either the environment or it's mining. And I think that there's a nuance to it that I think gets missed in that. And I think we've got to all accept that the backbone of South Africa's economy for the last 100 years has been mining. And that's not going to change. There's still going to be a considerable element of our economic and GDP is going to come through mining. I think the West Coast is an interesting dynamic because you haven't got the enormous workforces that you would have on the reef as one example, and I think Mike's alluded to it there. But also there is a mechanism. When mining companies make application, they're supposed to draft a social labor plan. And that social labor plan is supposed to set out their commitments in terms of what they're going to be doing for the community, how many jobs they're going to be how many people they're going to be employing, what type of jobs, how much training they're going to do, any perhaps like a bursary program that they may have. All of that stuff is supposed to be recorded in a social labor plan, and that social labor plan is supposed to be audited every single year. There's supposed to be a report submitted to the DMR, recording whether they've met their targets, if they haven't, why they haven't, what they're going to be doing to do it in the following 12 months. And unfortunately, that level of oversight's just not there. So the social labor plan kind of falls by the wayside, and years pass and communities get disaffected. And if anyone travels up the West Coast, you'll notice it. I mean, it's palpable in those little towns like Papendorp, like Doringbai, that there's an abject sense of hopelessness. And I mean, so many promises have been made, but if you go and walk around on the ground there, you'll wonder, well, where's all this wealth been extracted that has been extracted? Where's it gone? Because it certainly doesn't look like it's in the neighborhood here. And that's not to say there aren't responsible mining companies doing the right thing up there, but it seems to be the exception rather than the rule. But that's part of our legal accountability program, has been to get access to those social labor plans and then almost audit them and call out the bad behavior and try and get those that are errant back in line, so that the communities can see a bit of benefit.
And I think that speaks to the crucial watchdog role that MPOs and organizations such as yourself, such as BirdLife South Africa, what we're doing is basically making sure that things are done correctly and that the right process is done. Because if it's not for organizations such as yourself and BirdLife South Africa, and our team involved on the West Coast as well, and various other organizations active in the area, it's just going to be slipped under the radar because these individuals perhaps might not be aligned with the benefits of conservation and protecting an area and its natural heritage. So I think it's extremely important what you say there, Patrick. And I was down on the West Coast the other day. We were actually everybody just chatting about this before we went live. But we've got some work that's just commencing along the West Coast now, and it all kind of ties in really well. And Pat, Mike, Tian, I'm sure we're going to be chatting about this in collaboration going forward as well. We've already collaborated with opposing some applications, etc. But I was on the ground in Papendorp the other day, and Patrick, the best way to describe it, like you said, is you walk in there and you feel like there's this tangible sense of hopelessness. There's been promises that have been made, and the community is sitting there and they have nothing. They literally have nothing. There's one form of income there, and it's the EPWP team. And that is it. That is it. Otherwise, they have to travel further afield. And it's sad because that whole area, and I raised the question earlier, if I take a step back about mining creates jobs and it's so important, because it's supporting local economies, etc. But that's where, and increasingly so going forward, that this concept of ecotourism, but not just ecotourism, tourism in general, plays such a big role. The West Coast is renowned for tourism, and it's a massive, massive component of certainly what we're doing. And Mike, gentlemen, it's probably something that you are doing your best to promote as well. Just saying, guys, the West Coast is phenomenal. There's birding, there's wildflowers, there's beach walks, there's recreational jogs along the beach, there's hikes with tour operators that take you through the cultural heritage of the area. I mean, tourism is one of the largest contributors towards our country's GDP. So it's a very, very important concept here, and something that I'm sure we all want to promote moving forward is the concept of tourism in favor of detrimental acts like mining.
John, can I just chime in there quickly? Just looking at the Q&A box, a lot of the questions are coming up about, is it reactionary? What sort of strategic framework, document, and planning? And just to engage on that specifically. So one of the projects that we have at Protect the West Coast is engaging on what's called a strategic environmental assessment, which should be exactly that document, a very high level policy document that identifies all the areas, this is in an ideal world, identifies all the areas on the West Coast that we would consider as biodiversity sensitive, or areas that are of cultural significance, or areas that should be set aside for particular tourism or whatever it might be. But in the same framework, set up areas, say, right, well, if you're going to make an application for mining, then you can make an application for mining in this area or in this area. And so everyone has a guideline document with which to work from. We've engaged with the Minister's office, we've had no response. We've engaged at a provincial level. There is work being done around, oh my goodness, now I'm not, Matsikama municipality. So Matsikama municipality are in the process of drawing up what would be a spatial development framework in their specific area to try and do exactly that. So we're engaging at multiple levels to try and stop, as people are raising, and it's an important point, this reactionary response, to try and get a more high-level response so that everyone knows where the parameters are and what the rules are and where we should be and shouldn't be making applications. Because at the moment it is very ad hoc.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, if I may, times have changed, and there's all these new wonderful opportunities around nature-based solutions that the government seems hell-bent on ignoring, to be honest. And it's industries like the kelp farming industry or the abalone farming industry or algae farming. We've engaged quite significantly with a company called CH4, and they're building these algae plants that transform kelp into algae, and then they turn that into a biofuel for the shipping industry. And the West Coast and in particular old mining sites are perfect for these types of plants. And like one plant can feasibly employ 1,000 people, with long-term sustainable jobs, working in an industry that's circular, that uses, energy from the sun and the wind, and does absolutely zero damage to the environment. And so those are the types of industries we would love to see the West Coast transformed from, mining has a place in certain areas, and we believe like a strategic environmental assessment would speak to where those areas are. But, we would love to see these new technologies through nature-based solutions come into the space and transform the West Coast away from extractive industry, an extractive industry area, to that of nature-based solutions. So
Excellent, and 100%. I think so it's something that's becoming, like I mentioned earlier, a lot more prevalent and important as it's growing, as outdoor recreational activities, nature-based activities are growing in popularity. Yeah, Mike, you're right. The times are changing. I mean, if I just look at birding as the simple example, it is one of the fastest growing recreational activities in the world, second only to golf, and even golf makes reference to birds. So it's certainly growing and growing very quickly, and it's worth billions. The global birding market is worth billions. It's not. I'm not exaggerating this. It's factual. The U.S. market alone is worth millions of dollars, potentially closing in on even billions per annum. So yeah, it's growing, and it's growing rapidly, and it's things that we need to embrace, because certainly if we don't embrace these nature-based activities, then we stand a chance at losing parts of our natural heritage in South Africa. A question from Rob Simmons here, which I think is also important, because I think a lot of people might be sitting here and thinking, how on earth are people, mining corporations or anybody really able to go ahead with these applications? Yes, there's an application process they need to follow. There's requirements. There's procedures they need to undertake, and recommendations they need to adhere to. Rob specifically asks, are they allowed to mine or undergo these activities in national parks and private reserves? What is the stance in terms of where these companies can undertake such acts? Is there any regulations around that in particular?
I'll chime in first, Pat, and then you can back me up. But yeah, so our legislation is quite well put out, and protected areas are nicely demarcated, but a lot of these mining companies are um, playing around the back door, or proposing adequate mitigation measures to account for mining in areas where you wouldn't necessarily allow them. So at the moment, there aren't much mining activities going on in national parks or like marine protected areas, for example, but there are a lot of applications that are bordering these protected areas, or there's been a recent application to mine within the buffer zone of the Namakwa National Park, and closer to home, there's been a phosphate mine application close to Langebaan Lagoon. So, they might not mine within the reserve or the protected area or the park, but a lot of them are creeping towards that buffer zone, or creeping closely towards it, or mining applications stacking together and squeezing the natural habitat in between, not creating that corridor for biodiversity to move in. So yeah, that's where I'll stop for now and give Pat a chance.
No, John, 100%. I think the bottom line is that even protected areas, there are no holy cows when it comes to mining. There are certain boxes that need to be ticked, but there are no holy cows for mining technically. So they could mine anywhere, potentially. They just need the required consents to be granted. But we have examples of them mining in the Richtersveld National Park, I think, Mike, which we know is happening. Yeah. And what you get caught in is this race. If the application for mining is granted before the protected area is declared, then the mining right is like a trump card. So you've got to rush around and try and protect as much as you can, if you can, and that's a hell of a long process, especially because you've got a lot of privately owned land up on the west coast. So it's not as easy as that. I mean, the Olifants estuary is a prime example. That is not protected as we stand. It hasn't even got an approved estuarine management plan because it's been so fraught, because there's so many different stakeholders and vested interests. That they just haven't managed to meet the minds to actually get an approved estuarine management plan, let alone a protected area declared. I mean, and that would seem to be what should be very low-hanging fruit. But we've had to fight just to get the no-go area on the estuary, and that doesn't include in an area inland. So there are a multitude of challenges in getting those protected areas declared.
Certainly. And it can almost make one very despondent, I suppose, through this whole process. And on a slightly less formal or legalese or scientific based note, what keeps you gentlemen devoted to continuing your work to save the West Coast? And Patrick, we'll start with you. Mike, Tian, what is getting you up in the morning and fighting through this?
Thanks, John. No, it's dark days, but it's the team that we've got to protect the West Coast. They're a genuinely committed, good bunch of people who have been doing this on a shoestring budget, and have just cobbled together what we have, and the impact that we've had. Listening to Mike talk to the presentation at the beginning, you forget the journey that we've walked together and how much has actually happened in that short space of time. And we have already seen a change in behavior from some of the mining companies up there. We've had mining companies reach out to us, and maybe Mike can talk a bit more about that, and want to engage with us because they know that there is somebody who's watching now. And so for us, there has been a tangible difference, and it does seem as though the Rome is burning, but we've seen some traction, and if we can build that momentum and get the whole thing pivoted so that the West Coast doesn't have to be one big extractive mining operation. There's so many other options, and I think we are making a few yards. So that's kind of what keeps us going, I suppose.
Yeah, sure. Not a hell of a lot to add there. I think for me, I've been going up the West Coast. I live in Cape Town and Kommetjie, which is technically on the West Coast. But I've been going up the West Coast since I was 13 years old. And I spent a lot of time up in that area. And I just kind of feel like it's really worth protecting, and that's the bottom line. And I've got two young children now that I'm hoping will be able to enjoy the West Coast the same way that I have over the years, and um, yeah, we've put together an amazing team, and like Pat says, we've really just put this whole project together on a literally no budget, and it's, luckily now we've moved into a space where funding's become less of a problem, but yeah, it's just the amazing team that we have, and also the wins that we've had. Things are starting to fall into place, and we've had mining operators on the West Coast reach out to us in a way that they're starting to struggle with getting funding, which is really great, because of all the uproar and the noise that we're making. We're showing these guys up for who they really are, and a lot of these guys are looking to the international markets for funding to run their operations, to look for diamonds, look for minerals, and they're finding that harder and harder, and that's pushing them into a space where they actually have to mine correctly and in the right way, because the funders, that's a requirement from the funders, so there's lots of these little, elements and nuances that you don't really see, and that aren't really public, but then there's also the communities, that, for the first time ever, really, the communities have a bit more of a voice. We're providing a platform for people to have their say, and when issues come up and down the coast, we're there to help and support, and to do all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been an incredibly fulfilling journey, to be honest, and it's a real legacy project for me personally, and I probably can speak for the rest of the guys on our team, and we're in it for the long haul. We really want to see this through, and to see that the West Coast transitioned into a space that we know it can become.
Excellent. Excellent. Yourself, Tia?
Yeah, I mean, I think the right answer would be to say what keeps me going is the birds on the West Coast, because we need to protect them. But no, seriously, the natural environment on the West Coast is one of a kind. It's so special to anyone who's been there, especially the Olifants River estuary. It like holds a dear place in my heart, because that's why I did my entire postgrad studies, tropping up and down the mud flats in the Olifants River estuary looking for seagrass. So I've been up there many times, and it's that vast beauty, landscape, and the potential for nature-based solutions and ecotourism and all the above. Those opportunities are what get me going, is to help conserve, protect, and preserve it for future generations.
Amazing. Tian, I mean, observing seagrass might be a little less challenging, one would think, than looking at birds. Is there any factual form to that?
Wait, quickly repeat the question.
I said one would think that looking at seagrass would be a little less challenging than finding birds. How
No,
did was it an easy process up at the Olifants?
no. Well, yes and no. Some of the meadows were quite tricky to get to, and you have to get there by boat, which is big thanks to the Papendorp community, those local fishermen who took us out on their boats and showed us around. So yeah, not always as easy, but worth it.
Phenomenal. And I think, the reason I mention that is because it speaks to the need for us to preserve the broader ecosystems along the whole of the West Coast. It's not just birds, everybody. Everything is interlinked. Birds benefit from every other aspect of nature. And, they're merely just one of those indicators. Having birds around means there's a healthy environment, but, we need to protect everything, not just the birds. Gentlemen, we are or have gone a little bit over time, But I just want to encourage or certainly reiterate to everybody here that if you have sent a question, we will make these available to the team at Protect the West Coast afterwards. If your question hasn't been answered, I see Patrick behind the scenes has been furiously typing to many of you, furiously but enthusiastically. And I see he's managed to work through a number of these questions that we haven't had an opportunity to answer. But certainly we will get these through to the team at Protect the West Coast. Before we call things quit for the evening and bid you adieu, I just want to remind everybody I have posted in the comments section a link. We are going to be running the team here, BirdLife South Africa, will be running a 9 to 10:30 workshop tomorrow on developing avitourism along the West Coast. So this evening's Conservation Conversations webinar timed very nicely. So promoting avitourism and ecotourism as a industry along the West Coast. It's free, it's there, the link is in the chats and also on our social media pages. Or if you want, you can contact me directly after tonight's webinar, john.kinghorn@birdlife.org.za. Patrick, Mike, Tian, thank you for your time this evening. Everybody has been completely involved in this and enthusiastic about what you guys are doing. There's been numerous as you can see, flying, clapping hand emojis, as well as words of congratulations and words of encouragement to continue what you are doing. It's organizations such as yourselves, but specifically individuals such as yourselves who are making the real difference in South Africa. So thank you on behalf of all of us at BirdLife South Africa and everybody who tuned in this evening. We deeply value and appreciate the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you, John. Just a quick shout out to the Protect the West Coast team for everything that they do, and then also specifically Jacques Smith, who helped us put this presentation together. So thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jacques.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody, and we will see you on the next episode of Conservation Conversations. From all of us here at BirdLife South Africa and Protect the West Coast, have a lovely rest of the evening, and we will see you again shortly.